We had a good time yesterday, and thank Jerry and Stacy for having us. And had a lot to eat. Enjoyed ourselves. This past week, I think this past week was a national. The farm. I don't know how that's stated. I think it's a National Farm Safety Week. I always remember that because that's when I tore my foot off. And for years, it's either Bernice's brother or me, one or the other, was in the hospital. And it was a National Safety Week. Anyway, why I thought of that, just happened to think about it. And Steve, he got hurt. Haven't told him about Safety Week yet. Anyway, and I found some things here talking about prayer, and in Luke chapter 18, one verse said, "He spake a parable unto them to this end, that men ought always to pray and not to faint." And that's true. And old Satan would like for us to faint. He would like for us to fail. And we don't stand up, Satan gets the glory. And I remember when we was in school, I guess they took that out now, but we had to stand and pledge allegiance to the flag, and the teacher would read the scripture. We got in high school, I think we had it on the PA system. Somebody would read the scripture every morning. And I guess they do that anymore. I went to them school. There's not much of anything. I don't think like that. But anyway, we did that. I found a little thing here, a devotional. I'll read that. It says, and it's talking about prayer. It says, "You do not have because you do not ask. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks it will be opened." This is the confidence that we have in him, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. And if we know that he hears us, whatever we ask, lost my place. Whatever we ask, we know that we have the petitions that we have asked of him. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberty and without reproach, and it will be given to him. Open your mouth wide, and I will fill it. Men always ought to pray and not to lose heart or their faith. The eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their cry. The Lord hears and delivers them out of all their troubles. You will ask in my name, and I do not say to you that I will pray the Father to you. For the Father himself loves you. We don't have to go through a priest or anything like that. We can, we have the freedom to pray when we want to. And I was thinking about that when they took prayer out of school. They may take it out of school, but they don't take it out of the people that's there. And they can pray when they want to. It says, "Ask and you will receive, that your joy may be full." And it's a privilege to be able to pray, when we want to. They had a verse down here says, "If there are any tears in heaven, they may be for the answers to prayers that no one ever bothered to ask. I thought that was pretty good. But there's a lot of prayers that we ought to ask and pray for people and stuff that we don't get around to asking. But remember that, and we do have a privilege to pray, and we fail to think about it, I guess, or fail to recognize it, and but we should, and remember what a privilege that is. I've been much in prayer for our church, and for Brother Ellis as he leads us here, and be with those that's on the prayer list, and know that God knows each and every one, and be with their families. And stand and be dismissed in the classes. Joey, would you want to dismiss us, please?
We've been looking at the parable of the two debtors. We saw that, it started, if you back up to the beginning of verse 36, it started when the Pharisees had Jesus home to eat with them. And a lady came in who was a sinful, terribly sinful woman. And she began to anoint the feet of Jesus with oil. She washed his feet. She wept over his feet. She dried his feet with her hair. And the Pharisees began to criticize because Jesus was allowing this terrible, terrible sinner to touch him. And so that's what got the parable started, is this wicked, sinful woman dared to worship Christ and to demonstrate it by the anointing of the oil. In talking about that, or in answering the Pharisees, Jesus told about two men. One owed 500 pence, or it was about $75, which in today's terms don't sound like very much. But when you consider that the average wage for one day, from sun up to sundown, the average wage was about 1 penny. So 1 penny, $75, that is 7,500 pennies. That's how many days it would take to pay off the loan if he paid every penny that he made. That's not allowing food or rent or anything else. The other one owed 50 pence, or about 750 days, and that would be about 2 to 3 years, depending on how much he ate and how much his rent was and how many times he had to buy shoes for his kids, and clothes for his kids. That could take several years. And so the master of the house forgave both of them. He looked at, there was no reason other than his sovereign will. He chose by his own will to forgive them. Now, the Pharisee that invited him home was named Simon. And that's not Simon Peter. That's a totally different Simon. He was a very religious man, but even though he was religious, he had not so much as provided water for Jesus to wash his feet, let alone ointment. He had not worshiped Jesus. He had not showed compassion to Jesus. And yet he was criticizing this woman who did. And so Jesus gave the parable. Notice, and I'm going to go through this very quickly. The lady was courteous. And where were we? It was someplace this past week. I was with a group of preachers somewhere, or maybe 2 weeks. How many people are just rude? In church, out of church, in society, everywhere. People are just rude. This lady, because she worshiped Christ, was very courteous. She went beyond the common courtesy and actually washed his feet with very expensive oil. Years ago, my favorite, this was in college, so that tells you it's been a long time ago. My favorite aftershave was, what was it? I knew it. British Sterling. How many of you remember? You remember British Sterling? All right. That was my favorite aftershave. Well, I decided I wanted to order some here a while back, and a little bitty 1 or 2 ounce bottle was like $50 or $75. It was ridiculous. And I said, I am not spending that much on aftershave that nobody will notice 2 hours after you put it on anyway. So I bought some cheap junk at, I don't know, somewhere. But perfume, even back in those days, was very, very expensive. So for her to take this precious ointment, this perfume, and to pour it out on the feet of Jesus, the Pharisees thought she had lost her mind, and Jesus had lost his mind for letting her waste her money like that. Now, I'll throw this in. And this is not in the lesson. This is just Ellis theology from 55 years of experience. People that are stingy when it comes to church, God, and the service of God miss a lot of blessings. I started to say it another way, but they will spend, and I don't know what FCC tickets are now. Do you know? I think I read somewhere that they were like $100 a ticket. I don't know where that is in comparison. How much are UK tickets? You should know that one. $60 to sit on a hard seat and watch a bunch of men chase each other up and down the hall to see who can hit a basket the most. They will spend two people, 120 minimum, maybe 200, plus parking, plus any food they eat. And I've never tasted a hot dog that was worth $5 or $10. Yours were much better yesterday. But when you come to the church and the things of God, they're so tight they don't want to let a penny go. This lady was willing to demonstrate her love by spending a small fortune. Now, we also learn in this from the parable and the lady that even great sinners can be forgiven. Who is God obligated to save? Is he obligated? Okay. He is not obligated to save anybody. The fact that God saves anybody is an act of grace and mercy. But this lady was a horrible sinner. And God, for whatever reason, known only to himself, for reasons only he can say, chose to forgive her. Just like the master forgave the man with 500 pence and 50 pence, they both deserve the same amount of mercy and grace. Somehow we have gotten the idea that it takes more grace and more mercy to save a prostitute like her than it does to save a good little boy who was raised in church, never stole, never lied, never got caught lying, never got caught doing some terrible things. Somehow we've got it in our mind that saving a good person doesn't take much work at all. But both the bad, terrible, drunkard, murderer, thief, whatever, the worst of sinners is no more dead than the best of sinners. Both are dead. And it takes just as much grace and just as much mercy to save the good little kid as it does to save the mean, lousy, rotten, no good, stinking, terrible kid. Takes the same amount of grace. It's not big grace, little grace. It's grace. It's mercy. Who does God bestow it upon? Those whose names he wrote in the book of life before the foundation of the world. One of my favorite verses, one of 82,000 and something, I just finished the other day. I had counted every chapter. That was easy. 50 chapters in Genesis, add the chapters up. You can go through and add the verses up. There are, 1,200 chapters. You can go through and say, okay, this one's got 20 chapters, 21. You can add the chapters up. I just finished counting every word, not chapter, not verse, every word in the Bible, and there's a little over 82,000 words in the Bible. Now I'm going back and writing a Bible reading schedule based on words rather than chapters. If you go by chapters, 3 John has 13 verses, which is one chapter. Psalms 119 has 128 verses, but it's only one chapter. So if you go by chapter, you got to count chapter 3rd John, same as if you go by verses. Esther 8 and 9 is about 12 or 13 lines. John 11:35 is 2 words. Jesus wept. So if you go by verses, you still got long verses. If you go by words, they're all equal. That's why it's taken me 20 years to do this. But it's something that I was challenged years ago. Back to the lesson. We think there are good sinners and bad sinners. In reality, there are sinners. Every one of them is dead. There's not different degrees of dead. Oh, this person's dead, but this one's deader, and this one's deader than all of them. There's no dead, deader, and deadest. You're either dead or you're not. My dad used to work for a funeral home, and the owner of the funeral home had to go to Michigan, I think from Tennessee to Michigan, to pick up a body. And on the way home, they stopped to get gas, and a guy came over and said, "Where y'all going?" "Well, we're going to Tennessee." "Well, can I ride with you as far as Kentucky?" So the guy said, "Yeah, but I've got my partner in the front seat." So their partner comes out, gets in the car. They're driving down, this is before interstates. They're driving down the highway, and the guy who was riding along tapped on the window and said, "How much farther before we get something to eat?" And the partner liked to have jumped out the door because the only thing he knew was the dead body. Now, my dad says that's true. I believe my dad. So, if Dad says it's true, I have to believe it's at least true. It wasn't that one was dead and one was only half dead. My son, when he was on air care and still works air care occasionally, he was the one that would go over, and he had to do this several times, check a person out and look at the sheriff or whoever and say, "That person is dead." It's called pronouncing. He would pronounce, "This person is dead." Which reminds me of a joke. I don't know why I thought of a joke this morning. What would you like for people to say about you at your funeral? He's alive. Yeah. I would like to hear, "He's alive." Anyway, it doesn't take big grace, little grace. Big mercy, little mercy. When God forgives, it takes the same amount of grace to save the worst of sinners as it does to save the person that's never done anything bad. In fact, we're not going to go down that one. Now, some lessons from us. There are different degrees of sin in our way of thinking. There are some sins that society recognizes as worse than others. That's why we have different categories of law. There's a difference between involuntary manslaughter, vehicular homicide, and first-degree murder. The person is dead in all three cases, but the motive and the means were different. So society, there's about 5 or 6 different ways that you can kill somebody and be classified. There's first-degree murder. That's planned, premeditated. That is staked out. That is waiting for the opportunity. It was deliberate, and I knew I was going to do it, and I planned and plotted. That's first-degree murder. Second-degree murder, and it's been a long time, but second-degree murder is I killed you, but I didn't plan to. It just happened. Then there's involuntary manslaughter. You know, somebody breaks in, I shoot them. And by the way, I heard this the other day, and it is so false. It is so false. If somebody's trying to break in, shoot them in the yard, drag them in the house. With forensics now, they can tell exactly where they were shot. They can tell exactly that they were drug in. So if you shoot them in the yard, leave them in the yard, because otherwise you can be charged with tampering with evidence. With forensic science, I was amazed at what they can tell with the forensic science. Shooting them in the yard, dragging them in, only makes you look more guilty. They will know as soon as they get there, they will know you shot them in the yard and drug them in, and then you can be charged with tampering. So I'll just throw that out. But society has sins that are worse than other. I mentioned murder. I mentioned adultery. Nowadays, I guess I'm going to have to change my notes. Nowadays, society doesn't consider adultery and fornication any more than drinking a glass of water. That's how bad society has changed. But most cases still consider rape much worse than adultery. Although, what state was it? Some senator, it's been several months ago, introduced a bill in the state legislature to legalize child molestation. It didn't pass. You know, obviously there were enough people that, but he brought up a bill to legalize child molestation. Most places recognize rape as a terrible thing. But adultery, you're two consenting adults. Stealing depends on how much you steal. Oh, it was just an apple. I have, most of the officers that I work with, in fact, I think every one of them. One particular, we still get together even though he's retired. If he goes in when he was in uniform, there are a lot of places who will give free coffee to a police officer on duty in uniform. Many places do that. This one particular officer would not even take a cup of free coffee. He said taking a cup of coffee in his mind was as much of a bribe as taking $1,000 under the table. In his mind, a bribe is a bribe. It isn't the dollar amount. If you give me coffee, you want something in exchange. Not everybody. I tried to buy his lunch once, and we almost drew guns on each other over who was going to pay for lunch. And we've known each other for 25 years. We've eaten lunch together dozens and dozens of times. He still will not let me pay for his lunch, even though we've been good friends for 25 years, because he said, as much as I like you, I don't want to think, oh, he bought me lunch. He is the strictest guy. But in stealing, society has, oh, it was just a nickel candy bar. Well, there are no nickel candy bars anymore, are they? It was just $1 candy bar, which is what used to sell for a nickel. How much is stealing versus stealing? Somebody steals $100,000, they stole. They steal a candy bar, well, that wasn't a big deal. Anyway, those who commit bad sins in the Bible were worthy of death. But there are some sins that society does not consider sin, even most Christians. You ever heard of a little white lie? I am the world's worst. Now, my wife says I am excellent at avoiding a question rather than lying. I will avoid the question or change the subject. But if you asked me point blank, I was raised lying was one of the most worst things you could do. My mom said I could never tell a lie because I gave myself away. If I tried to lie to Mom, she could see right through me faster than a speeding bullet. But it's amazing how many Christians, well, it was just a little white lie. Out of those three words, little white lie, which one best describes it? Lie. Whether it's a black lie, white lie, big lie, little lie, it's still a lie. Doesn't matter. Now, is there such a thing as a sarcastic lie that's true? You've heard me before, okay. Yeah, I'll have to explain that one. He says, Are you going to get a case of beer on the way home? Why, of course I am. I lied, but I lied in such a way he knew the truth. You know, I don't even like to do that very often, but I do it sometimes. Idle thoughts. For a Christian, did you know that idle thoughts in the sight of God is sin? Not big sin, little sin. Sin. Just, what are you thinking about? Nothing. Oops. That means I'm idle and I'm actually sinning. Failure to obey God's word. God said it. We don't do it. That's sin. Hate, resentment, bitterness. I was talking to a preacher, I don't know, it's been a while back. And he was treated by several individuals. He was treated like dirt. I mean, there were some individuals within the church that wanted to get rid of him. And they told every lie on him you could tell. And I said, how do you deal with that? He said, I just ignore them and go on. I refuse to be filled with hate and anger. You know, they're the ones that ultimately left the church. He said, I refuse to be filled with anger and hate, because anger and hate and resentment are all abominations in the sight of God. And I've already covered, they all require the same amount of grace. Now, in the case of the lady, forgiveness resulted in change. When a person says they are saved, we have every right to examine their fruit and expect to see change. We had a member here. This has been years ago. Some of you that have been around for years probably would remember his name. But he told me one time that some things he did before he was saved. But he said the day God saved him, just like that, God took those desires away, and he never had the desire to drink, smoke, cuss, any of those things that he used to do. When God saved him, God changed him, and he gave those things up. He said that when God saved him, he laid his cigarettes down, never picked up another cigarette for the rest of his life. And yet people say, God saved me, and there's absolutely no change. This lady was changed. And any time we start to grow cold spiritually, I was listening to a song yesterday in the car. Actually, I drove Kathy's car so she could load my car up to come to the picnic. So I drove her car here to meet Brother Schultz, and then we parked her car here and drove mine down. So I drove her car, and she's got a flash drive full of music. So I turned it on, and it's a song I haven't heard it since the last time I drove her car. But the title was, Who Moved? If you're not as close to God as you once were, which one of you moved? Who moved, you or God? Wasn't God. So if you're not as close to God as you used to be, you are the one that moved, and you are the one that needs to get forgiveness and restoration and be back where you once were. I closed with the question, how has salvation changed you? Another question might be, how long did that change last? All right. You are dismissed.